morning, everyone, and welcome to the third and final webinar in the three-part series of Secrets of Elite Executive Teams with Zoe Routh. Today's topic is Role of the Leader in Elite Teams. Today, you are listening using your computer speaker system by default. You have the opportunity to submit questions to Zoe by typing them into the questions pane on the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. Zoe will address these during the presentation. I will now hand this over to Zoe.
Thank you, Ida. What a great pleasure it is to be here with you again from Ngunnawal country. I want to pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging, and really celebrate the land on which I stand because it is beautiful. As somebody who's imported from Canada, I am ever grateful every day for being in this fabulous country. Right, so we're into the final stretch of this series. I'm so happy that you're here. We went back to webinar model because for somehow when we converted the last webinar, we lost focus or ability to use the chat box. So we're going to use the Q&A box as a chat box for you. So feel free to pump in comments or questions as we go along. So today, role of the leader. Very important, right? So if you fall over, what happens? Hopefully someone in your team can pick up and run with the ball. But you never know. You don't want to set them up for that, do you? You want to make sure that you are not collapsing in a heap. So apart from some self-care issues, there are some specific things that we want to do as a leader to make sure that we massage the team and set it up effectively. So quick recap of where we have been so far on this journey. Welcome. Second page. This is the, hello. This is the, hang on, make sure you guys can see that better. That's better. So this is the journey that we want to take our teams on. Wherever we are, we want to get to elite. And we do that by doing two things, working on culture cohesion of the team, and two, their leadership capabilities. And after the first webinar, we sent you out 2 checklists to see how you went against leadership fundamentals as well as advanced leadership skills. I'd love to hear where you guys sat with your teams on that, whether you were a thumbs up across both the leadership fundamentals as well as the advanced leadership skills, or where you're like, building capability of our teams is one of the primary responsibilities and role of the leader to galvanize and create an elite performing team. So skill development is one of the key factors there. So feel free to share how you went. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or got work to do. So that was session 1, sort of laid out the roadmap of how to get to elite teams. And then session 2, we did a deep dive into the bicycle model, as I like to call high performing teams, where what we need is a clear purpose, a clear focus on results, and the gears in between are what keep the whole thing rolling. And that's about having really strong, clear structure in your teams, being able to develop and emphasize the strengths of each other and having those grow and come to fruition. And the third piece was about the ability to speak up. And the combination of those gears gives us nirvana when it comes to elite team performance. And that's about collaboration, innovation, and engagement, the big one. And the other big one is right in the middle, which is trust, which is a byproduct of doing all those things extremely well. So that's where we've been. Where we're going is all about you, the leader, and how you interact with your team. So a little bit of team dynamics. Now I've got a question for you. This is based on and I'll share the research once we get into it. The CEO or insert leader of team, how much impact does the CEO or leader of the team have on the performance of an organization? So in the Q&A box, you can hazard your guess out of percentages. How much percentage does the CEO affect the performance of the organization? So I love to hear what people think. How much is my impact? We'll just close that while you have a go at guessing the percentage of the impact of the CEO/leader on the performance of the organization. All right, Anthony says 35%. All right. Do I have any other bids? Let's see how we go. So 35%, 1 bid. Okay, nobody else is going to hazard a guess, or maybe you're hedging your bets. The research says 29%. So Kim says, I've worked in places where the CEO had a huge impact. Well, I think some of it's perceptual, right? What does impact mean? And that comes to a whole other webinar about how you measure performance and how you can be evidence-based in your performance. But 29% is that. One of the other webinar series I did on this topic, the participants rated a lot higher, like 80, 90%, they thought the CEO had an impact. So 29% is not 80%. It's still a fairly huge chunk. Like, if you think about a whole organization, a third of the performance essentially is directly related to what the CEO does, how they perform. That's pretty amazing. So it stands as a really important principle that we look after ourselves. And I'm not just talking self-care. I'm talking about how are we developing our perspective? How are we developing our leadership skills? How are we interacting with our team? It's absolutely fundamental. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know at this point, right? You're like, yeah, I get it. How I show up matters. Right. So we're going to dig into some of the reasons why it's hard to do that, and then some of the ways that we can do that better. Alrighty. So a couple of intro slides for you around this stuff. Ta-da! Secrets of elite executive teams. This is the research from Allison Mackey, The Effect of CEOs on Firm Performance in 2020. I think that's quite remarkable. And then this quote from this lady with crazy hair and an amazing name. So this is Cindy Wigglesworth. She is the author of SQ21, the 21 Skills of Spiritual Intelligence, which is advanced emotional intelligence. And she says the capacity of the organization is limited by the capacity of the leader. Yeah, absolutely. Your organization, your team cannot evolve past the development of the leader because they have so much authority and influence on the organization, up to 30% apparently. It is very difficult for leaders who have different ideas, more expansive ideas, to move the organization along if the CEO is not at a further stage of leadership maturity. Now, that's a very big topic, leadership maturity. And if you listen into my podcast next week, I have a whole episode dedicated to that. It's called Vertical Development, how we expand our perspective, how we grow our worldviews. So it's one of our critical responsibilities as leaders is to do that. So extend how we think and how we care in the world is part of the aspect of developing that. So question for you, why is leadership so hard? Why is it so hard? I love this as a question. It reminds me when I was teaching leadership fundamentals to one group of wine growers. And I asked them the question, how do you define leadership? And one of the guys said, leadership is hard. I thought, yep, that's a pretty good definition. But why? Why is it so hard? A couple of reasons. We are so focused on dealing with spot fires, they take up all of our time and energy. And usually the spot fires are to do with people stuff. That's why I wrote the book, People Stuff. It's the interpersonal dynamics that can really suck our time and energy. Now, in this current context, it's the changing context in which we find ourselves, which is so darn hard. So much volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. That's the acronym VUCA you've heard before. And the other one I would add is exponential. So change is happening at such a rapid rate. It's constantly shifting, moving sands. It's exhausting. So that's one of the reasons why leadership is so hard. There's no black and white trajectory either for our team dynamics or for our organization. We have to constantly adapt and make decisions on the fly. So we need to create an environment where we can do that much, much better. I just wrote an article today for my monthly newsletter, which comes out this week, on how to do that exactly. And one of the first tips in there is to clear the decks. So clear the decks, literally, I'm looking at my very messy desk right now going, I need to do this too. Clear the desk to make some space and clear your calendar. Get rid of commitments if you can, so that you have the breathing room, literally and mentally, so that you can address some of these hard issues. So that's one of the first tips in terms of how to show up as a leader, is to make sure that you've got space, literal space as well as figurative space, to do the thinking, to be able to respond rather than react to people and circumstances. The next one, which I already mentioned, is this constant change and volatility. I mean, I think we're all over it. And my heart goes out to everybody who is in lockdown, which seems like half the country. In Canberra, we're still in our COVID happy bubble. We haven't had a lockdown since last year. And we're very privileged to be here. And we also feel very strongly for all of our peers and colleagues who aren't in Canberra and are still in lockdown again. So heart goes out to you guys. It does have ripple effects. Of course it does. It affects all of our businesses here in Canberra, and it affects all the businesses on the ground as well. So even though we've got some liberties, we're still in this together. So thinking of you. The weight of responsibility is another reason why leadership is so darn hard. Like having to make tough decisions day in, day out, especially in this context that we find ourselves, again, is exhausting. And especially at the beginning of the pandemic last year, when leaders had to make some really tough calls, laying people off, shutting down the business, protecting whatever nest egg they did have, it's really a huge burden. Now, the other side of that is that there's huge joy in when things go well, obviously. Why else would leaders stump up to the plate to take on the burden of responsibility? So these are some of the reasons why it's so hard. It is also a joyful experience. It is a joyful experience to lead an elite team. It is a joyful experience to see people thrive under your stewardship. And I think that's a great way to think of leadership, is that we are stewards. We're not necessarily servants, though servant leadership is a very popular term these days. I prefer steward because it means that we have responsibility and care for, and with responsibility to people and an organization, and we are in service to it. We're not self-effacing that kind of the servant model intonates. I don't think it says that, but it has that sort of implication in it, which I don't necessarily like. So stewards it is. All right, so how do we shift? How do we shift and make leadership a little bit easier? Well, there's a journey that we can go on, and it has two axes. One is about perspective, which I mentioned earlier. We need to expand our perspective, our capability and ability to see more of the picture. When we see more of the picture, we can make more fine-tuned and nuanced responses and actions when it comes to this complexity piece. And the people and leadership skills is the other axis. The journey that we go on as leaders is something like this. When we step into a leadership role, we want to make a difference. But we may not necessarily have all the leadership skills and people skills, or necessarily a big perspective. And you might see this in some of your team members. You're like, they're so committed to a change, they don't know how to do it with finesse. And when that happens, we are agitators. Agitators, like, yes, things need to change. We need to do this and we can do that. And it's a lot of rah-rah with not a lot of pathway forward. So as we develop our people and leadership skills and our perspective grows, and that was the journey that we talked about, moving to that elite part of the model, where we expand people's ability to see across the whole organization is one of the ways that we can do that. We start to be able to galvanize people around us to create results together. And this is moving into elite team performance, if you like. And as individual leaders, we become achievers. We can set a plan, we can get people to enact on it, we can help them be accountable, we give feedback, we delegate, we accomplish all this wonderful stuff together. That's fantastic in a linear, contained world. Doesn't work so well in an exponential, volatile, uncertain, changeable, or complex, ambiguous circumstance. So if we keep doing things the way that we did as achievers, in terms of setting a plan and being linear and being sort of mono-focused in our targets and our objectives, and we just try and do more of it to meet the current circumstances, we end up fading out. And it ain't so good place to be, really, she says with good English. What we want to do is make a critical shift that takes us from achievers to amplifiers. And this critical shift is changing our focus. It's expanding our perspective and developing our people and leadership skills. There's 3 particular things that we need to shift in order to be able to move into an amplifier mode. And I'll explain the difference between achievers and amplifiers as we go along. By the way, you should have the workbook to take notes that we sent through ahead of time. Hopefully, Ida, you can make sure that happens. There is a notebook where you can take notes electronically or print it out. The critical shift in order to be able to contend with the volatility, the uncertainty is this. 1, remove friction. Remove friction in your personal life, remove friction in your team's world, remove friction where you can in the organization. I'm not talking about constructive friction where you have disagreements that actually lead to progress. I'm talking about like procedural stuff, process stuff, which slows people down, holds them back, irritates them. So reducing friction becomes one of your key priorities as a leader. Looking at your team, think about your processes and systems and ask yourself, where are things clunky and how can we make them easier so that people can get on and leverage their skills and make the contribution that they want to make? So reducing friction is the first aspect of that critical shift. The second one is to build capability. That's one of the key messages I've said throughout this series, is that you want to build the capability of your team members. You want them to be able to be achievers in their own right and moving towards being amplifiers. Because you imagine if you had an organization of amplifiers, people who help grow the skills and talents of the people around them, people who can see the bigger picture, people who can see a long-term horizon as well as balance in the now, then this organization will be thriving. So that's what we're aiming for. So building capability is the second critical shift that you need to do. And the third one is maximizing energy. Maximizing energy. Because if you continue to work as an achiever and just do more of the same stuff, but bigger volume of it, you're going to burn out. So maximizing energy becomes one of the critical factors for you as a leader and how you show up. And I'm going to give you some tips today on how to do that. It's little biohacks and little shorthand to help you boost your energy. All right. Okay. Now, these are some of your obstacles in your own head about this. Your first concern is, I'm not the priority here, the team is. I don't want to spend the organization's money on myself for development. It's all about the team. I go back to what Cindy said, is that the organization is limited by the development of the leader. And so you need to be developing yourself. So great that you're attending webinars like this. That's fantastic. And make sure that you act on the things that you learn. The second concern is you don't have the time. You don't have the time to work on yourself. You don't have the time not to. And any work that you do on yourself is time leveraged, not time spent. So everything that you do in terms of your development, whether it's reading or listening to podcasts or doing some reflection piece or attending courses, all of that you need to be able to leverage. And so your commitment to this, the time that we've got together, should be able to be turned around exponentially to help amplify the abilities of the people around you. So get rid of those two concerns. One, that it's not about you, it's about everybody else. Not necessarily, you are important. And two, you don't have the time. You don't have the time not to. Okay, so let's just banish those concerns out of the way. Here's another tip for you is if you're going to do some development, here's some handy dandy resources for you. Composure is my first book. It's all about the big picture of you, understanding your drivers, your ambitions, and who you are as a leader. And this other fantastic one about by Stephen Kotler is called The Art of Impossible, and it dives into he has a great formula for how to get more flow into your life. And we talked about flow in the last webinar, how to get group flow. This book spells it out. How do you actually get more of that really amazing energy where you're focused, on fire, and creative and dynamic? And I'll give you a couple of tips later from that book on how to get more into that state of mind. I think I mentioned a couple of them in the last webinar, but I'll reiterate them. So here's 2 resources to help you get your stuff together. Okay. Here's the big difference, right? So in your notebook, you've got this table. Let's talk about the difference between achiever and amplifier and that shift that we need to make. The context when we're achiever is a linear context, like a defined period of time. There's variables that are contained and constrained, and there's sort of it's a black and white kind of world. Oh, so much easier. The amplifier world is one that's exponential. And it's asking questions. How could we be 10 times, 100 times bigger, faster, better? And when you start to ask exponential questions, a whole bunch of new ideas happen, as opposed to a linear question, which is like, how can we add 5% to our bottom line? Both are important, right? The amplifier plays in both worlds and emphasizes the exponentiality, which means you look towards technology and other resources to help you move into that world. The mindset of the achiever is about getting goals, goal getting. I'm a goal getter. Set a target, hit it, move on. The amplifier world, because of the volatility and uncertainty, is all about experimentation. What can you test and try in many little events to see if we can move towards more of an exponential result? It's a very different world. Goal getting is very clear. Here's a target, here's a plan, move on it. Experimentation is unknown, and you risk failure, of course. The action is about being reactive as an achiever. Things happen because we're so focused, and then we have to react to it, as opposed to the amplifier, which is proactive. So with our capacity to see longer time horizons and see greater complexity, we can be more responsive. Results first is the achiever focus. The amplifier focus is people first. And this is a big shift. And that's why we're talking about elite executive teams today, because we want to be more nimble. And how can we be more nimble is we amplify the performance of our team. And the last one is transactional and versus transformational. Now, here is a really, really important message for you. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to take everything that's good from achiever and bring it forward. It's not either or, it's and. And the and piece is really critical. So to make the shift, as I mentioned, we need to develop your perspective as well as your people and leadership skills. And in doing this, we bring the best of the achiever forward into the stage of the amplifier. So it's a transcend and include idea. We take the best of being a linear goal getter, reactive, results first, transactional leader to somebody who can also do this other aspects of it. Alrighty. So these skills, and you had the checklist that we talked about. After the first session, you got the checklist that went through the detail of these advanced leadership skills. And this is the polarity that you need to manage as a leader. The ability to make decisions in the now, for the now, as well as contend with the future, the next. And this balance between now and next is a constant tension that needs to be managed. As is this tension between team and task. It's a constant balance. How much task are you doing? How much focus do you put on the plan and taking action? And how much energy do you put into the team and its development? There's no clear formula. It's not 50-50 necessarily. It's all contextual. But we need to move as leaders between these tensions of now and next and team and task. And as we do that, there's specific skill sets that gravitate to each of those. And these are the skills that you need to be extremely comfortable with and extending and developing. When we're dealing with the team and focused on now, this is really about leading culture. And that's been a lot of what we've been talking about with the elite executive teams, is about this leading culture piece. When we are focused on the task and now, this is about leading performance. This is about, who's accountable for delivering these things, what's getting in the way, where's the friction in the organization, that kind of stuff. When we're focused on next and we're leading the team, this is always about leading change. Because as we introduce new ideas, new concepts, new programs, new methodologies into the organization, that's an adaptation the team needs to adjust to. And it's always an emotional one, as we'll come to see when we talk about the four devils. Then when we're leading task and into the future with the next, this is all about leading strategy. So future focused, present focused, and the sway between the two. Whew, no wonder leaders are exhausted, right? It's a lot to contend with. And yet, when we do this well, we start to move into this amplifier piece where we can actually elevate the people around us. We can elevate the organization with us. Alrighty. And the specifics are in those checklists that I sent through after the first session. Whoops. That was it for the slides, but I have more. I have more. Don't worry. Okay. Now, if there's anything that you'd like clarified so far about that journey, feel free to pop a question in the chat box as we go along. And as you're considering that, we are going to talk about when things go wrong. Coming back to the people dynamics of this leadership piece. What happens when your executive team goes blah, and you have to contend with difficult behaviors? All right. Okay. Here we go. There are 4 P's when it comes to the difficulties with your team member. And essentially, or team members, when you're having problems with your team members, chances are there's a fear of loss of some sort that you're dealing with, or that they're dealing with. In any case, it's causing difficult behaviors. I've mapped these out in my book, People Stuff, and I've called them the 4 devils of people stuff. And it's important that we use this map to understand what could possibly be driving some of the rifts that you might find in your executive teams. So fear of loss is the overarching thing that can put people into an unhelpful state of mind. An unhelpful state of mind is called an amygdala hijack. Some of you may be familiar with this term. The amygdala is part of the brain that's responsible for fight and flight. It's an almond-shaped organ at the base of your brainstem that filters everything in your experience through the reservoir of all of your past experiences and determines whether this new experience is safe or unsafe. If it's unsafe, the amygdala goes whoop, whoop, sends out alerts and says, ooh, we are under threat here, and it shoots cortisol and adrenaline through your body. So you are primed to fight, to run away, or to freeze. And if you've ever been in an accident or witnessed something that made you go into a weird state where you couldn't say or do anything, that is an amygdala hijack. It happened to me not so long ago, actually. I was in Newcastle visiting some family. We're walking along the beach, and the swell was really big, and there was little kids in this little paddle pool in Newcastle Baths. And we're like, oh, I don't know about this. Every once in a while, there'd be a big wave surge through and wash the pool out. And we were watching this, and then all of a sudden the big wave came. And this kid, about an 8-year-old kid, got picked up by the surf and swept over the side of the baths. And as the sea was going out, I'm like, that kid's going to get either beat up on the rocks or swept out to sea. The dad was running after him. My husband, who I was with, ran into the surf, and I just stood there going, I couldn't speak, I couldn't see anything. I could just watch it in slow motion, watching this poor kid get washed over the edge of the bath. It ends well. So the kid's mom ran in, grabbed the kid, and got them out. So the child was fine, and my husband came out. He did fall over, but he was fine too. And everybody cleared out of the surge pool, thank goodness. But that sort of paralysis can also be primed for fighting and flighting. Now, you don't have to witness an accident to be put into that state. So there are some things at work that can trigger this unhelpful state, whether it's the paralysis piece or whether we go into fight mode or flight mode, where we shut down. And what happens in our brains because we're so full of cortisol and adrenaline, the neocortex part of our brain just dials down a little bit. That's our executive functional part of the brain, where we make decisions, where we learn, where we listen, where we demonstrate empathy, all that kind of stuff to the side, because we're all just focused on survival. So you can imagine if you're with your leadership team sitting around the table and something, which I'll talk about in a second, triggers the amygdala in one or more of your team, they're going into elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, very narrow focus, literally. You lose your peripheral vision, you just focused on this thing. The neocortex dials down, you lose access to your short-term memory, And you're kind of like, right. They're not going to have a great discussion about whatever it is on the agenda, because they're just going to be in survival mode. And it doesn't look as beastly as I've demonstrated it. It's very subtle. How do you know? How do you know that people have been triggered? So I'm going to talk about some of the behaviors and give you some of the triggers so you can start to map and troubleshoot some of these issues ahead of time. Okay, amygdala hijack, 4 devils, let's go. So the first devil is called the Firebug. All these are very elemental, and that's because I think human emotion is quite elemental. It's got the forces of nature behind it. So the Firebug shows up as angry and argumentative. They feel righteous and wronged, and they'll argue the point all the time, banging tables. That's a good sign that people are triggered. Now, not everybody bangs the table. I'm not sure I've actually seen anybody bang the table in a meeting, but it makes good drama. They do argue, and I've seen people get hot under the collar and argue the point. What is triggering the Firebug is fear of loss of power, and that's your first P. I'll move this a little bit closer. Let's see how we're doing there. Okay. Power. Loss of power. How do people lose power? When decisions are made to them without consultation, without stewardship of their own area or decision making. So when they lose that sense of autonomy, that loss of power, it can be very disturbing. So no wonder people get argumentative about that. So if you're trying to push a decision on your team and somebody starts to argue, and not just intellectually argue, but emotionally argue, then chances are this is one of the triggers that's pushed them to that. Loss of power, decisions being made to them without too much of their consultation. And this can erupt into turf wars also. So if you have competition amongst your team members where they've got sharp elbows, pointy elbows, and they're vying for resources, that's another classic example where you can get silos and have some of these issues come up. Then it could be a loss of power thing. So silos are a symptom potentially, not all the time, of a triggered behavior, which needs to be addressed. And we'll talk about the 5 R's, which are the antidote to some of these triggers. So that's the first devil, the fire devil. And this is a little fire with a face on it. It doesn't look like that probably from the video, but they're in my book. Now, the second devil is the storm driver, and that's a cloud with a lightning bolt, and it's like, "Arr." And the storm driver looks a little bit like the Firebug in terms that they're very animated, but they're more emotional, distressed than the Firebug. The Firebug is angry, righteous, and wronged. The storm driver is more hurt and harried. And if you've ever been in a conversation with someone where you're like, and all you can hear and experience is the emotion, this is the storm driver at work. And what happens in terms of the trigger there's 2 possible ones. It's when we feel our status is threatened, or we have a sense of fairness not occurring. And in some conversations with attendees, I know that this is happening to them. The status piece is an interesting one because the word status, I think, it puts people off. People think I don't have status issues. We all have status concerns. We are wired to have status concerns. It's how we evolved as a species, as tribal animals. To know who does what in the tribe or the organization is really important safety piece for us. And so we do assign status to different people in the team or in the organization or in the tribe because they have different sets of responsibilities. And in terms of leadership maturity, we develop our sense of esteem through the development of our status. In workplaces, this means usually talks about our developing our expertise. As we develop our expertise, we get our sense of self around the status of our expertise. So in terms of what this might look around your leadership table, if someone's being triggered by status, it could be that their opinion wasn't asked on a topic over which they have a lot of knowledge, that they weren't consulted on a particular topic. For me, this shows up in my personal world. And this will show up in your personal world too. So, I'm Canadian, I shared that already. I married an Australian guy. And I grew up in Winnipeg, which is a very snowy, cold place. This last couple winters, they've had -40. Horrible. And so there's a lot of snow for about 6 months of the year. So I know about snow. I know about driving in snow. My husband is Australian. He did not grow up in snow. We go to the snow here in Australia. We go skiing. We're both mad skiers. And I remember we were driving up to the snow and we parked in this parking lot, and then we had to drive out of it again. And by the time we came back to the car, there was a lot of snow around on the ground. And I'm like, honey, we just need to dig this out a little bit more. Otherwise, the wheels are going to slip. And he's like, yeah. Should she be right? I don't think I said it with the right Australian accent, but you can imagine the scene. Oh, she'll be right. I'm like, don't. He puts it in first gear and he goes, Rrr! I'm like, oh man. And the wheels are spinning and spinning. I'm like, don't do it anymore. We're going to have to dig this out. Otherwise we'll get, I'm like, Rrr! I got so mad. But why? It was a status threat. And I worked this out not long after my amygdala calmed down. It was a status threat because I'm Canadian. I've lived 26 years before coming to Australia in snow. I know about snow, and he was ignoring my expertise on driving in snow. And it really pushed my buttons. So and what happened? I got angry, I got frustrated, and I was like, I told you so. Of course, that comes out. So if you've ever sat around a leadership table and someone's like, I told you so, it's likely a status trigger here. And so this particular P is about loss of position. Position and disregard for your particular expertise. The fairness piece is another one that's wired into the storm driver. And this is all about, because we are tribal people, we know that fairness doesn't always mean equal. It means distribution of resources according to status and acceptable performance, etc. And if we feel that something happens that tips that out of whack, that's a threat for us, because why are they getting that promotion? Why are they getting that office? And we feel righteous. No, we don't feel righteous. We feel wronged. We feel hurt. And that's why the storm driver is a little bit more emotional, because it feels a little bit more personal to us. And so the emotion can be really challenging for us. So that's the storm driver. Moving on to the third P, this is actually a wave. It looks like a ghost a little bit. And this is the water bomber. The water bomber is similar to the storm driver in that they're very emotional, very emotive in terms of their response. They're different in that they have trouble expressing what's bothering them verbally. So we tend to, all that distress comes out in behavior. And you've got a water bomber situation on hand because of a couple of different scenarios. You've got the clam, for example. When you ask them, how are you? And they go, fine. And they're so clammed up around the issue, they're totally not fine. And it's difficult because they won't necessarily speak about what's going on, but there's something distressing them. The other version of the water bomber is like the energy vampire, and they might be just trailing themselves through a meeting or through the venue or the organization or the office with this kind of wake behind them, this wake of yeah, that's the water bomber. And so the stuff that we see there, you might have blaming, you might have sulking. The trigger for it is the third P, which is loss of place. Loss of place. And this is all about not feeling safe at work, not feeling like we belong, not feeling like we have somewhere that we're part of. And so it can be very distressing for us if we get triggered that way. And little things can trigger it. Little things like not being asked for coffee by the rest of the team. Little things by being left off the meeting invitation for a particular topic. That could be also a status threat. And it could also be triggered by that. Depends on the sensitivity of things. You don't necessarily know, but if it's emotional, you'd hedge your bets that it's possibly something like this. A sense of belonging or loss of place can sit there, and it's quite difficult. Now, the last devil here, which is how do I describe it? It's like an earthquake. It's kind of diving down. It's called the ground splitter, and the ground splitter is somebody similar to the water bomber in that they don't speak up about their issues. They let all their frustration come out underground. They do things like backbiting, back channeling, white anting. They'll be a bit two-faced. So they say, I agree with that decision, and behind your back, they're just ignoring it or doing something completely differently. So this is a really difficult behavior. Because you may not necessarily know that it's going on. You might hear rumors about it, and then you might ask people about it. They're not willing to speak up necessarily. So the ground splitter, what triggers that? Sometimes it's some of these other triggers. Often it's loss of performance. Loss of performance. So people like to do a good job. They like to be able to hit goals and targets because of the dopamine, the feel-good sensation of like, yeah, I did it, made it. And when we are stuck and we aren't able to perform, this can cause us to feel a distress. And there might be some contributing factors about why we don't speak up. Maybe we don't want to challenge the boss, maybe because we're yes people and so on. And so all that energy and frustration and fear shows up in this difficult behavior. Again, it's somebody who's having an amygdala hijack. So I'd be curious to see if you've experienced all of any of those behaviors. Feel free to use the Q&A box if you've experienced any of these behaviors. So we've got the Firebug, argumentative. We've got the storm driver, which is emotional ranting. We've got the water bomber, which is sulking. And we've got the ground splitter, which is undermining. So if you've experienced any of those, chances are you've got the triggers going on there. So let's talk about the antidote. Aha, good news at last, right? The 4 R's. So these are preventative measures. And they're also, if you've already got some of these behaviors, you implement them will help lessen some of the issues. So with the Firebug, when it's loss of power and they've got turf wars going on, silos and turf wars, silos and turf wars, what you want to do is have rules. So this is your first R, rules. And what that means is that you're very clear about their scope of responsibility, what their decision-making ability is, how much license they have to do X, Y, and Z within a particular context. So people, all of us, since the age of 2, actually love some boundaries. We may push them, but it helps us feel a sense of certainty with it. So having really strong rules and regulations about team interactions, team responsibilities is a really great antidote to help the Firebug feel safer and more in control. So Firebugs like to have more control, especially if it's been wrested off them. So rules are the first antidote there. Now, with your water bomber, which again, this is about the trigger of fairness and status, or loss of fairness and status, what you want to have in place there is recognition. Recognition. With my snow incident, all I wanted from my husband was, "You're right. You know more about driving in the snow than I do." And you know what? That's what happened. He actually didn't say those words. He's like, you can drive out now." He put me behind the wheel so I could drive out of the snow after we dug out properly. So recognition is acknowledgement of somebody's skills and expertise, and helping them feel like they are valued because of their contribution. So recognition, as we saw in the previous webinars, is all about acknowledging people. Okay, that's your second R. Now, place has 2 R's with it. And the first one is about relationships. This comes back to our point around team cohesion earlier, is that we need to build our sense of team and get to know each other. And relationships, building really strong relationships is really critical here. So the other aspect of this for someone who's in distress, like a water bomber, is reassurance. And you'll be spending a lot of one-on-one time with them, helping them feel like it's safe, they are welcome, they are wanted, they are valued. So this reassurance piece is really important here. All right, that leaves us with one more R. And this R is about regulation. So if the ground splitter is concerned about not being able to perform, the regulation piece is about actually being really clear about their key performance indicators. What do they have to deliver on? And checking to make sure that they are not overburdened, that their responsibilities are within scope and reasonable, etc. Okay, so this is, what did I say? Regulation is the 5th R. Regulation. And it's surprising how badly organizations do KPIs, by the way. I haven't met one yet that has got a good set of KPIs. And I always point to Stacey Barr's work. That's STACEYBARR at staceybarr.com, and her work around key performance indicators. Really, you want to help people see where they fit in the whole organization, how they contribute to the system of the organization, how they can actually focus on improving the system, as opposed to just getting scorecards for how they show up every day. There needs to be a balance between individual responsibilities and results in the system. I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's both. But we tend to just measure people as opposed to their contribution to the system. And I think that is a challenge, and that can create a rod for people's backs. Because we know that, for example, if all we have for performance indicators are targets, people will do anything to hit those targets, especially if it's got a financial result attached to it. So we need to be mindful of individual performance targets as well as team performance targets, and a blend or a balance needs to be there. I think it's a polarity that needs to be managed well. Right, 4 Ps, 5 Rs to help address some of these issues that can come up on executive teams and teams in general. So if you do realize that you've got one of these threats happening in your team and things are already underway, then you need to speak to some of that. You need to ask people what they think is fair. You need to ask people about what kind of power or control do they want back in their teams. Conversation is going to be the way forward, and you listening is going to be the really important piece. Now, you may not be able to deliver everything on everybody's wish list. What people want most is to be heard, and that is the number one priority, I think, that you need to have as a leader. All right, now we've got 10 minutes left. Anthony, I see that you say you didn't receive the checklist, so check in with Ida. She'll make sure that all the resources that we've shared along the series are posted in a place where you can all access it. So the 2 checklists from the first session, and then the third one from the second session, which was the high performing teams checklist. Those will all be available through Ida, and she'll let you know about all of that. Now, the other aspect of you, the leader, is about your leadership presence. Yeah, and I'm talking about not your reputational presence, but your energy. So the third critical shift, you remember, to move from achiever to amplifier was about maximizing energy. And I promised to give you some tips from Stephen Kotler, and I'll give you some tips from Ginny Whitelaw. So Stephen Kotler, to help get you into flow, one of the 3 things that you need to do to ensure flow, and I think I mentioned these in the second webinar, but just in case I didn't, Meditation. Clear the decks, clear your head, develop your ability to focus. That's what meditation does. Mindfulness helps open your senses to everything around you. So you need actually both. You need meditation for focus, and you need mindfulness to be able to absorb and make connections. That's number one tip. Number two tip is exercise. Getting good cardiovascular exercise where you move your body, oxygenate your blood 3 times a week, 30 minutes. And having a really healthy body is absolutely a way to promote getting into flow and having clarity of mind. So many of you already have great exercise practices. If you don't, get on it. And the third piece is gratitude. It's amazing. So Kotler's done a whole bunch of research about the impact of a gratitude practice as a trigger for us being able to get into flow. So having a gratitude practice is as simple as in your journal listing 3 things that you are grateful for. And it doesn't have to be grandiose things, the little things. Practice on it. Challenge yourself to find 3 things every day, different from the day before, that you can be grateful for. Everything from the rain that's coming down and filling my and nurturing my garden, to grateful for the amazing technology that allows us to connect, and grateful for a hot cup of tea that feels really nice after lunch. So this gratitude practice, what it does, it helps lower our cortisol and adrenaline, which is the amygdala hijack stuff, and primes us to be able to be open to thinking creatively and being dynamic. So those are your 3 tips from Kotler about getting into flow. Ginny Whitelaw wrote this book called Resonate, Zen and the Art of Making a Difference. Fantastic book. I highly recommend it. And she is a NASA scientist. So she wanted to be an astronaut, couldn't make it as an astronaut, so became a scientist there, worked for NASA for years. She is a Zen Aikido master also. So she has these 2 worlds coming together, and a leadership expert. And her research, because she's a scientist as well as a Zen Aikido practitioner, is that we are connected. And how we show up actually literally has an energetic frequency. If we are going to help people come on board with us and create a strong sense of team cohesion, our energy needs to be really strong and resonant, not scattered. So how do we do that? We start with breathing. Now, if you're watching this, good opportunity for you to stand up and do this with me. I can't tell if you're doing it. You will get heaps of benefit if you do it with me. So go ahead, stand up. I'm going to show you a couple of practices to help you get your energy just flowing beautifully, so that when you show up to a meeting or have a conversation with one of your colleagues, that your energy is engaging, and it helps calm their energy and train their energy in a really positive alpha wave frequency. Okay, you ready? So you're standing, breathing. So let's focus on this. I want you to breathe in regularly and evenly through the chest. So imagine breath coming in, breath coming in, breath going out. Nice, even, regular pace. Just doesn't even have to be deep. I'm doing it a bit deeply so that you can see how it works. You don't have to move your hands. I'm just demonstrating to remind you to imagine breath coming in and out of your heart area. Why the heart? The heart is a very powerful muscle. And when it pumps, it actually emits really strong energetic frequencies. More concentrated energy than our brain. Keep breathing, by the way. So our brain has a lot of circuitry in it, but it's kind of all over the place. The heart is just doof, 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 and it puts out this beautiful resonant energy. And they've measured it meters out from people in terms of its effect. True story. So that's the first piece, breathing. Let's get your peripheral vision happening. And when we do that, that actually entrains our brain into an open, focused area so we can be creative. So this is a stepping stone to getting into flow. So how we do this is we actually use your arms now. Imagine breathing up, pressing down that air through the bottom of your feet into the ground so you're anchoring. Then you breathe up again, all the way up. Should have worn a different jacket. Breathe out, keeping your eyes straight ahead and trying to see your fingers in your peripheral. I'll go again. And up again. Keep your eyes straight and your peripheral vision acting. When we activate our, I'm going to do this again with me, I'm going to talk you through it. When we activate our peripheral vision, it actually allows our brain to dip into meditation like state. Okay, so you should feel clear, energized, focused, resonant. So your vibes, they're called vibes, they are just letting out this wonderful energy. And you can imagine showing up centered like this into a meeting where you're going to address some of the 4 devil issues. You are not going to get triggered. And hopefully you'll be able to calm people down as well, just by the presence of your energy. This is such an important thing to do. You can actually lead your whole team through that little exercise we just did. And then you'll have a group of people who are just kind of, I do it often with my leadership teams that I do work with. And with my amplifiers group, when we meet, we start with breathing because it gets us focused and calm and here and present, which is one of your core deliverables and essential skills that you need as a leader. All right, I'm feeling zenned out now. Oh, good thing too, because we're about to close. So, if there's anything else you want to know, anything else you'd like me to share, use the Q&A box right now. So we've been on an enormous journey together over the last 3 weeks. We've looked at the map and pathway to elite teams. We've looked at the nuts and bolts of how to get there. And then today we've talked about the responsibility of the leader. And I've given you a map called the 4 Devils of People Stuff to help you navigate and troubleshoot some of those issues. There's a lot to do as a leader. There's a lot to contend with, and it is a big calling. And I do not say that word lightly. I think it is a calling to be a leader. And I think it's a calling that we can all access. And it takes a lot of courage to step into it. It takes a lot of self-mastery and self-awareness. So if you're going to walk away with anything from this webinar series, is to be kind and gentle on yourself. The world needs leaders like you to step into the challenge of leadership because we have so many issues that we need to resolve. We also have so much potential and such a great horizon ahead. So we need every leader to be brave and courageous and resonant as they step into their leadership roles and look at the beautiful people around you and help them do the same. So that's my wish for you, is that you continue to live well and lead well. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm there quite a lot, or visit me at zoerouth.com. Download my free white paper there, my free report on how to spot and manage difficult behaviors in the workplace. It goes into a little bit more detail on the 4 devils that we covered today. Or you can listen to my podcast, the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. In the meantime, thank you. Thank you so much for being here with me and to opening your hearts and minds to being a greater, more amazing leader than you already are. Thanks.
Thank you, Zoe, for taking the time in offering our members with your 3-part series. I hope our members are able to, or if they're not already started, implementing the information they've taken away from these sessions. Over the coming days, you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to view today's recording along with other relevant information. I would also include Zoe's email address as part of this email should you have any other questions that come to mind. On behalf of Zoe and APPA, thank you for all our participants in joining us today. And thank you once again, and I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you.